Greetings, traveler. In recent years, there have been so many examples of games that come out in a state that is best described as not ready. They're full of bugs, there are many core features missing, and it leaves players with a question, why did they bring out the game if it's not ready? This is a question that I've been wondering about a lot, and it's a question that led me to completely change the way I develop games, from having a strict deadline to having no deadline at all. My name is Santos. I've been working in the games industry for over 13 years now, and in all of my career, deadlines were a big thing, right? And it was very strange the way they were implemented, because for most of the development time in a single game, we were told that this is when the game has to release, everything needs to be done by that date, make sure your work has no delays and so on. But when that time actually came, the leadership of the studio would take a look at the game, see it's not really in a ready state, and then extend that deadline by 3 months, 6 months, whatever. And that was really strange to me, because on one hand we were told to rush, there's no tomorrow, and on the other it seemed like such an easy thing to just extend development by 6 months or a year, because why not? So after looking into it quite a bit more, I realized that, well, the people that were making these decisions knew that if the game is not ready, it's not a good idea to push it out, right? Which sounds very logical. So we did have to ship all these things eventually, and when we did, we of course knew that there are so many other things we could do to improve the game, fix more bugs, add more features, and so on. But there did come a time where we specifically had to release the game in its current state, whatever that was. So what made the change from easily extending the deadlines to having to release it at a certain point? Well, it was very simply the fact that the budget had run out for several projects I worked on, and there was no other option but to release the game in whatever state it was. So that's what really pushed the decision to release it at that point in time. And of course, that had its own problems, right? The game was not as good as it could be. Users, of course, immediately realized. But the leadership of the studio was of the mind that, well, if the game is good enough in its current state and it gets enough user interest, and more crucially, users buying the game, buying items in the game and showing interest in that way, then that is incentive for the studio leadership to say, okay, there is potential in this product, let's extend the development, let's see what we can do with this. If there was no interest from people, which was very logical in the state that the game was in, then that means that this is a dead project and we shouldn't spend any more time on it. Which was very strange to me, because it's not about a game being good or bad, right? It's how far along its goal it has come. Is it very close to completion? Is it polished? Or is it still lacking all these important things? So now that I'm working on my own game and I make my own decisions about how to go about these things, I realize that having this strict deadline in mind when I'm developing my own games makes no sense for me. And let me explain that. So this is not to say that a game development cycle should take 50 years. This is not to say that you should make no plan for how you're going about your development. But in my case, I realized that since I'm working on somewhat of a new type of game, type of system, there's really no reference for when this thing will be done, except for players saying that, this is fun to play, we would like to see the full version. And there's no way of knowing when that moment will happen. So my challenge in that case was to come up with a system, with a development methodology that would allow for this extended deadline, if you want to call it that, but at the same time it would make it financially viable to extend it like that. So how would I approach this then? Or how did I approach it in reality? The most important thing in this process was not hiring a huge team of 100 full-time, super highly skilled members and say, okay guys, I don't know what we're making yet, but start working. This sounds comical when I say it like that, but you would be surprised how many companies out there do exactly this. They say, well, how can you make good games without good people? So let's hire a bunch of people and let's take it different. This happens extremely often, and it's very strange for me. So again, this is not to say that this should never happen, but the cases where this methodology can be used are very specific. But I see this being used way more often than it should, I think. So what did I do? I went a bit more into learning how to create a prototype for my game all by myself. This was really important. It meant I could work on the game as much as I wanted. I could work evenings, mornings, weekends, holidays, whatever. There was nobody who could stop me, or there was nobody I had to rely on to see the result of the prototype I was working on in terms of gameplay, which is the most important factor for me. So I could work on it as much as I wanted, and there was no other immediate cost associated with that. So in that sense, it was free, other than my time, of course. And in that sense, I could spend as much time as I wanted fine-tuning and refining the basic gameplay until, first of all, I was satisfied with it. And then, because I could generate my own executables of the game, I could give it to my friends, ask them their opinion, discuss the game over coffee, discuss what features would be nice to have, what big problems are there at the moment, and I could continue this at my own pace, in a way. And now the question becomes, well, if you're just going to keep working on it forever, when do you stop? It's a good question. See, my motivation is, of course, to have the game available to players as quickly as possible. So it is in my interest to complete the game as quickly as possible. So even though there's no deadline, my motivation is not to extend the development period, it's to make it as short as possible. So these two forces work together to keep the balance here. And moving forward with this, as soon as I knew that the gameplay is at a state that I like, then I could move forward and talk about, okay, how many programmers do we need to implement that feature? What art do we need? What kind of sounds do we have in mind? How is that all going to fit together? And then progressively put more and more money into this to take the project further forward. But those are very specific decisions, and their cost is extremely clear. The task is created before somebody is hired or somebody is assigned a task. This is extremely important. And again, I almost never see this happening in this order. Usually people hire a bunch of developers, and after they hire them, they think about what tasks they want to assign to them. So the benefit that I noticed with working like this on my project was that because the task was extremely clear, then the cost of that person or that team was also extremely clear for me. And I could make a decision of whether, first of all, I can afford it. Second of all, is that worth it? Is the time frame proposed here sensible? And so on. So yes, I'm still able to work on this project with no deadlines, which is in a way kind of like paradise for game developers. But at the same time, I want to push it out as quickly as possible. So it's in my self-interest to use time and money and all these other resources as efficiently as I can. So I know I've spoken before about the benefits of not having a huge team right from the beginning when working on a new project. So maybe consider this in that frame. And please let me know what you think about this and if you have used it before in your game development experience and how it has worked for you. So thank you for your time today. Thank you so much for listening. And as always, have fun.